All right, everybody. Hey, good morning. I'm in a cave. I came out and found a limestone cave. You'll see the stalactites above me, and then the stalagmites below me. All right, so the tight is top, and it comes down through the water, going through the limestone over these many, many, many years. And then on the bottom, the stalagmites, you might trip over them, stalagmite, that you can see them growing kind of at the bottom as they drip, and then eventually they connect and form a column. Anyway, very interesting. Okay, so today we are on chapter 5, I believe, chapter 5 of Cave of the Moving Shadows. Kimba messed up their hunt, and they want to banish him. They're angry at him. They think his power is bad, and he went down into the cave to kind of run away from the problems where all the rest of his tribe were arguing and fighting with Rab and Erda, who are his parents, essentially, his adopted parents. And the last thing we heard was a form moved toward him, shimmering a whitish green. It had wide spreading antlers, outthrust claws, a long and flaring tail. Its face was bestial, but it walked on 2 feet. Chapter 5. For an instant, Kimba froze with fear. He knew this figure, knew it well, but momentarily he had been taken by surprise, and the sight was a terrifying one. "Utrecht?" he asked, and he was aware his voice sounded like the peep of a newly hatched bird. "Why are you here, Kimba?" The boy backed up until he felt the cold wall behind him. The sorcerer, in the most sacred and mystifying of his costumes, loomed over him. Utrecht had appeared from his secret den, Kimba realized. The boy had never seen it, never been in it. As often as he had worked with the sorcerer in the grotto, it was a place permitted for Utrecht alone. Kimba turned his head away. He could not look directly into that awful, gleaming, beast-like face. "The tribe," he said. "They will banish me." "What?" "They will banish me." He heard the heavy snorts that were Utrecht's manner of breathing. "Come," said the sorcerer. Bathed in the whitish green color, Utrecht seemed to float along the cave floor. He carried a juniper bush torch that burned brightly without emitting the sooty smoke that a pine branch would. They passed through a thin slit that Kimba had never before noticed and climbed a narrow passageway that ended in a small chamber. In the flickering light, Kimba saw furs, tools, and other shadowy objects scattered about. The stalactites on the roof, like irregular rows of teeth, hung down just over Utrecht's head. The sorcerer handed Kimba the torch. "It is because of the mighty one that was lost to us?" he asked. "Yes, they will banish me." "Do not tell me what they will do. You still thirst to be a hunter?" "Yes." "Even after yesterday?" "Yes." "You have the power, Kimba. You must use it for the tribe. Let the hunters risk their skins. There are many hunters, but the power is rare. Do not let some mighty one. The pitch of his voice rose and the words grew indistinct. Tufts of his beard had gotten into his mouth, as they often did, and caused him to sputter as he talked. Utrecht never seemed to be aware of it until he had finished what he had to say. Then he would make a face and rub his hand over his lips, clearing the strands away. He pulled off the bare cuffs and claws covering his hands. Gripping the antlers, he lifted off the mask. It was made of the hide of some animal with evil-looking eyebrows and mouth and a hideous nose painted on in red and blue. Then he removed the bison robe with its sewn-on wolf's tail. Kimba stared at the glowing bits of costume on the cave floor. So they are glowing. How do they make things glow 40,000 years ago in ancient times? Utrecht stooped, his knees cracking, and raised a skin covering. There on the floor, a small nest glittered with the same sort of light the costume had given off. "Do you know it?" he asked. Kimba leaned closer. It was foxfire. The luminescent fungus, luminous fungus he had seen growing around the thick roots of certain trees. Utrecht picked some of it up and demonstrated how he smeared it over his mask and robe. Kimba hesitantly touched the gleaming mask. Remember, Utrecht said, not to let the tribe see you gathering it. They must not know how it is done. That'll come in later in the story, so about the whole foxfire and glowing. Groaning, the old man lowered himself onto a thick pile of hides. There is much you must learn yet. He pointed with one of his two fingers on his left hand. Bring me that, he ordered. Kimba tugged a large leathery bundle over to Utrecht. It felt like the pelt of a woolly rhinoceros. I've never carried this, said Kimba. During the summer, when the tribe left the cave to travel about in pursuit of game, it was Kimba's task to carry many of Utrecht's possessions. It remains here, in the secret place, even when the tribe is gone. No one else dares enter here. He undid the thong around the bundle while Kimba squatted close by. There were furs and paints and masks and whistles the boy could see. Then Utrecht lifted high a smooth, curly-haired skin. It was that of a bison. The black horns still projected from the head. Utrecht shook it out, then thrust it at Kimba. Yours, he said. Kimba held the bison hide at arm's length, admiring it. Utrecht motioned him to put it on. It was much larger than he was. It engulfed him when he slipped into it, and he had to let almost half of it drag behind. He pulled the hood low over his face. It was warm and stifling, but immediately he felt different, powerful, mysterious, able to work wonders. He began a slow shuffling dance. He had not intended to, but something seemed to possess him. It was as though he had gotten out of his own skin and into the bison's. His feet jerked forward in quick, prancing steps. His head bowed and rose rhythmically. Feelings welled up in him as he danced, feelings of strength, of speed, of oneness with all the creatures that thundered over the grasslands. Afterward, he was quiet. He allowed the awareness of who he was and where he was flow back in. In that costume, in that dance, he had been something other than himself. With the memory still fresh, he became confused again. Was this the power? Had the power worked through him? Good, Utrecht said. Good. He instructed Kimba to put the costume in a corner that was now his. He was free to enter the secret den whenever he chose. And Utrecht would come here with him. For now, he would learn the deeper mysteries. Why now, Utrecht? Because now is the time. The tribe must know that you are to remain with us. I have chosen you to follow me, and they must know that this is how it will be. I have not taught you as much as I might have. Now I will do so. There is still much more for you to learn. The skills of the sorcerer, he went on, must be worked at continually. The paintings were most important, for it was they which could magically produce game for the hunters. They believed that if they painted well enough on the cave walls, that those game, the animals would be summoned out in the fields, and they would be able to go find them and hunt them. But Kimba would also be taught the rites to transform boys into men and the rites to send the dead on their long journey. And he would learn the ways of healing, the ways of foreseeing the future by gazing at the heavens, and the legends that must always be kept alive and told to the tribe as new generations appeared. This is before they wrote. They didn't write anything down. There was no writing yet. So they had what they call an oral tradition. They had to share the stories so that each generation would remember them and tell the next generation. Already Kimba had much of the power, Utrecht said. It was born in him, just as it had been born into Utrecht. It took a long, long time to learn to manage the power so the tribe would reap its benefits. The power is not for you as an individual. The power is to be used to help the tribe. But it had been born into Kimba, and this had been clear from the beginning. The sorcerer reminded Kimba of how he had joined the tribe. So here's a little background information on how they found Kimba. It had been during this very season, a warm day in a series of chilly days, when rain mixed with snow had fallen. The tribe had been following a game trail, and suddenly, there ahead of them had appeared a child. It was Kimba. It was a boy who did not look to be beyond 2 summers of age. He was seated on a rock, and his hand was outstretched. Standing on it was a ground squirrel that was not many days old itself. The boy was smiling and chuckling at the little animal. It kept looking at him and seemed to have no fright. He did nothing to trap it or to prevent it from running away. "I did not understand," said Utrecht, "but I felt the power at work in you." The child had smiled at the members of the tribe, no more afraid of them than the squirrel was of him. The hunters had fanned out and searched the area, warily with spears ready. Eventually they found the body of a man, partially buried by a large rock slide. There must have been others under there, but the boulders were too heavy to move. The little boy must have wandered off from his party just before an avalanche of melting snow had loosened the rocks. So he was the only one that survived from his tribe. Everybody else was wiped out in that landslide. "That, too, was an omen," said Utrecht. "You had been spared, and no one else. And the tribe came to you almost at once, if we had not arrived." The boy had been able to speak a few words in a tongue, meaning language, they understood, and he had given his name as Kimba. He had not known what had happened to his people. He could not say if they had been part of a larger party. He had cried at last when the tribe had taken him along on its journey. But he had adapted quickly to his new situation. To the tribe he remained a mystery, a child with strange, wide-set green eyes. That's another sign, green eyes. All others in the tribe had eyes of brown. He was a child who at 5 summers was demonstrating the ability to scratch on boulders and make amazingly accurate likenesses of game animals. He was a child who manifested the power more surely than Utrecht had at that same age, even more power than what Utrecht showed when he was that age. "I have wondered if others among you had the power too," Utrecht said. "I have wondered what sort of tribe they were." "I remember only a woman who held me often," said Kimba, "and a man who picked me up and threw me in the air and whose face was rough when he rubbed it against mine. I remembered being carried on long marches and being awakened once by shouts and screams. I remember a river and fish caught and thrown flopping beside me. I remember nothing else of that time. I remember well, he said. Only you and Erda and Rab and the rest of the tribe. I remember no faces from before you found me." Utrecht recalled that the tribe had inquired about Kimba's origins of every other band it had met. So they do meet other tribes, and typically they don't fight with other tribes. You'd have to have a reason, and they would want to fight and get injured and killed for no reason. And sometimes they would trade. None had ever heard of such a boy or known who his people might be. "I have no other people," Kimba exclaimed. "I am of the tribe." And then his voice fell so that Utrecht could scarcely hear him. "But now they will banish me." "They will not," the sorcerer said. "They say my power is bad. How can you show them it is not? You will see." It was necessary at times, Utrecht continued, to do what some birds do when their young are threatened by a hungry animal. The bird pretends to have a broken wing. The predator, thinking she will be easily caught, follows her. She leads it away from her brood, her eggs or her chicks. And then she suddenly flies away. What he meant, Utrecht explained, was that in some situations there is a need to prevent trouble by diverting attention. Come along, he told Kimba. Back they went through the dark, looping corridors until the light became clear and Kimba could see a cluster of people. Silence fell as Utrecht and Kimba appeared. Erda moved toward the boy as though to shield him, but the sorcerer motioned her away. Utrecht and Kimba stood at the entrance to the cave. Members of the tribe began to gather around them. There was a loud shout from Narek, Mrodag's father. He was with a group of hunters spread out in a line and searching the broken flatland in the distance. There he is, Narek shouted, and the hunters ran back toward the cave. We have been hunting him, Narek said to Utrecht. He was a huge, grizzled man, next only to Utrecht in age. His body was a mass of battle scars. He must go. His power is bad. It will kill us all. He must go, repeated Mrodag, joining in the crowd. He must go. Rab pushed to the front of the throng to stand near Kimba, but Narek shouldered his way past Rab and poked a thick finger at the boy. He is not of the tribe. It was wrong to take him in. He has brought bad power. Swiftly, Utrecht swung his staff, filed to a needle point, so that it all but touched Narek's heart. The big hunter, startled, took a few steps backward. His power is not bad, Utrecht declared. Only I can judge whose power is good and whose is bad. Kimba's power is good. My final journey must start soon. Who will summon the game then? One of you? None of you has the power. In winters to come, Kimba's power will mean the difference between life and death. He cost us the mighty one, Narek protested. We have no meat. We will have meat, Utrecht said. I will summon game today. I will use my power, and Kimba's power will help. I will hold a summoning rite today. I want you to know what a summoning rite is, so pay attention. Here it goes. Cheers rang out, and there were cries of, good, good, we will have meat. Make ready, Utrecht said, for the summoning rite. Make ready. Come, Kimba. He led the boy back into the cave. The tribe watched quiet now, respecting the privacy and the responsibility of these two who had the power. Kimba noticed that Narek was scowling, but the rest of the hunters seemed elated, which means super happy. And Kimba's friend Tabak had broken into a wide grin. Utrecht had not called a summoning rite for a long while. Although the tribe's need was great, it had seldom happened that at this season the herds they fed from were so hard to find. With the melting of the snows, game ordinarily would be more plentiful. Some of the hunters had suggested a summoning rite, but without stating their wishes bluntly, for no one could make demands of the sorcerer. All in the tribe were conscious that there were only rare periods when the rite could be effective, and that these times were known only to those with the power. Utrecht, by announcing the rite, had made it clear that at last this was the proper time. So it must be, Kimba decided. Surely Utrecht would not have made the decision just because of Kimba's predicament. Surely the decision was based on Utrecht's secret knowledge of the ways of the animals. It must be, the boy surmised, that the fortunate timing of the summoning rite was but another example of the sorcerer's power. Is that true, or do you think the sorcerer, Utrecht, just called it so that he could save Kimba from being banished? It was a ceremony that Kimba had grown to know well. As usual, he would be concealed behind a large square boulder that bulged out of one wall in the grotto. I'm going to read a summoning rite later in the book, and I want you to compare the two, this summoning rite and the other summoning rite, because there's going to be another summoning rite later. I want you to see if you can notice the differences. Just as the sun stood directly overhead, the men began filing into the cave. They had daubed their bodies with paint, as Utrecht had directed, and each held a spear or club. They hesitated on the threshold of the grotto, then stepped in. Two fires were burning on the red clay soil. The hunters' shadows seemed to leap about the huge chamber. Remember the name of the book, Cave of the Moving Shadows? Sometimes mingling with the figures of the beasts painted on the walls. The hunters seemed awed and alone in the hushed chamber. Modag, especially, who had seen few of these rites, cast his eyes about nervously. His jutting jaw was held high, but Kimba noticed with some pleasure that the young hunter's hands were shaking. He likes that Modag was scared. Then a high, weird crooning began. It seemed to have no source. It rebounded off the walls and the vaulted roof. It stopped, but its echo persisted. Suddenly, Utrecht stood before them. He had entered through the hole to the secret den, and apparently so swiftly that he might have materialized out of nothingness. He wore the same glowing costume that had so surprised Kimba. The hunters had seen it before, yet it always brought a gasp from them. The sorcerer uttered a piercing howl, gesticulating with his bare claw hands, doing a rapid jig with his feet. Gone was the slowness and stiffness of an old man. For this rite, for these few moments, he had made himself into something ageless. He whirled about the room, glistening with the radiance of the foxfire, his shadow monstrous on the dim walls before the painted portrait of the mammoth. His dance stopped. He faced the mighty one, shrilling even louder. He flung his hands out at the creature, as though his gesture had caused it to come into being. The sounds he made rose to an inhuman peak. They became a blood-curdling shriek, and he lunged at the mighty one on the wall, clawing it fiercely. This was Kimba's signal. Hidden behind the boulder, he dropped grass and shredded birch bark into the fire near him. The flame shot up, vividly illuminating Utrecht. Utrecht danced back a few steps, then once more screeched and clawed at the mammoth. Again, Kimba, unseen by the hunters, dropped tinder on the fire. The flames soared. So the hunters are watching this going, whoa, watching these fire magically shoot up into the ceiling almost. The hunters leaned forward, almost hypnotized. Who could doubt the sorcerer's power? Who could doubt he would produce game for them? Now Utrecht motioned to the hunters. They let out ear-shattering yells and waved their weapons, hopping one foot to the other. They surrounded the mighty one's picture. Utrecht slipped to the edge of the tightly pressed mass of men. His loud, insistent voice goaded them into faster and more abandoned sounds. The tempo of the dancing picked up. Soon they were hurling their bodies to and fro, their throats taut with the force of their savage cries. Cave of the Moving Shadows. Now the shadows are really moving. Kimba's blood seemed to thrum with excitement. He longed to join them and lift his voice in a fearsome, numbing shriek. "The mighty one!" shouted Utrecht. "The mighty one! It is ours! It is ours!" He signaled Kimba. The boy dumped the last of the grass and bark onto the fire. It flared up, almost licking the ceiling. The hunters roared, filled with a sudden sense of their prowess and invincibility. They thrust their spears at the mammoth and struck their clubs at it, screaming in fury and defiance. Again and again they attacked. "Now!" Utrecht cried out. "Now!" The hunters turned from the beast on the wall. Still shouting, they dashed from the grotto, eager to begin the chase. Sure they would find game, certain they would succeed in downing it. "You thirst to go along?" Utrecht asked, his voice low and hoarse after the strain he had put upon it. "Yes," said Kimba. "You are not to hunt, as I told you yesterday when you sought to disobey me. But I must remember that you are still a boy, and the ways of the hunter stir your blood, and it is necessary that you know the animals." He handed Kimba a flint and a limestone drawing block. "You must go near them if you are to learn to make them come alive on the walls, to make them know it is their lot to feed and clothe the tribe. You must feel your kinship to them." He paused a moment. "And it must become clear to the tribe that you have the power. Go then." "Yes, Kimba agreed enthusiastically. He ran from the chamber and raised his voice in imitation of the yell the hunters had given. Kimba! The boy looked back. But do not go too near, Utrecht said. Okay, so Kimba gets to go. He doesn't get to hunt, but he gets to go, and he has to learn to see the mighty ones and be able to draw them, to visualize them. Okay, well, thank you guys for hanging out. We'll see what happens tomorrow on the hunt. He's going to go on. I'm sure it'll be interesting. All right, guys, take care. We'll see you tomorrow.